Somebody told me that when I lose weight, my metabolic rate will slow down and I can actually break my metabolism. Also, I have heard that in order to boost my metabolism, I have to eat more frequently and more in general, and then I will lose weight faster. Is it true or not? Let's talk about that. Hello, I'm Dr. Sam, this is Dr. Sam's Health, and today we'd like to talk about metabolic rate. By the way, I've already made a video about metabolism a while ago, a couple of years ago. It's quite informative, check it out. It's on my playlist on my channel. But today I would like to talk about one specific set of misconceptions rotating around the concept of metabolic rate being slow or fast, and things we can do to boost our metabolism, and the ways our metabolism can become very slow and hinder our progress, and so on. Before getting to that, I have to make my disclaimers, which are: I'm a medical doctor, but nothing I talk about here on YouTube or at my website and my blogs should be taken as a medical advice, and also opinions that I express are solely mine, and they do not necessarily represent the opinions of my regulatory bodies, my colleges, my universities. So we're done with the disclaimers, let's get into the meat of the problem. Likely you have heard phrases like, oh, this guy must have a very fast metabolism, he can eat whatever he wants and he never gains weight. Or, I have a slow metabolism and that's why no matter what I eat, how few meals I have, even if I look at food, I still keep gaining weight. Such a big problem. Or this idea of boosting your metabolism by eating more and more frequently, or the idea that if you are going on a strict diet, your metabolism will somehow break down or slow down to the point that you will not lose weight and you will be lethargic and you will pretty much wither and die. All these things are ungrounded. They do not have much to do with reality, but I think I have found the key problem with the whole concept of metabolic rate that somehow leads to all these misconceptions. So let me explain what exactly I'm talking about. Let's start with the idea of metabolic rate. What is that? Obviously, I'm tempted to refer you back to my video on metabolism that I've made a while ago. I know it's the second shameless plug on that, but please still check it out. The gist of it is that metabolism is the sum of all biochemical processes in our body. They involve different substances, so we usually measure this, we quantify these processes by measuring the amount of energy that is being spent or generated by these biochemical reactions. And as you can imagine, no matter what we do, if we just even sit, if I sit in this chair and do nothing, I kind of lay back, I'm at perfect rest, my body still spends some energy. We spend energy to do anything, we spend energy to talk, to gesticulate, to move, we spend energy to breathe, we spend energy to think, to be emotional, we spend energy to keep our heart beating, we spend energy to maintain a certain level of glucose in our bloodstream, we spend energy to regulate our body temperature, and so on. There is a long list of processes that we spend our energy on, but in general we spend a certain amount of energy per day, and that amount is called total daily energy expenditure, which essentially equates to metabolic rate. And we use the term rate because that's the amount of energy spent per certain unit of time. Usually it's a day. Also, if we talk about energy being spent, we have to say several words about the energy sources. So we've got two major sources of energy. Essentially, it's one actually. The main source of energy for us is nutrients that are coming from external environment with food, but also we have certain amount of storages of carbohydrates in the form of glycogen, fat in the form of adipose tissue or fat, and obviously sometimes in some starvation mode. By the way, it's worth making a separate video and I will make it eventually. But when we are starving, when we are in a consistent caloric deficit, sometimes our body has to use its own protein. We break down our own proteins and turn them into amino acids, and then we turn them into glucose and break them down to generate some energy. Long-winded sentence, but the point is the main source of energy is still the energy coming with nutrition. If we don't get enough energy coming from dietary sources, we will use our own storages. And I'm talking about all of that just because I know that in several minutes we'll get back to it. Energy spent, energy generated, and there is certain balance between these two amounts of energies. But returning to metabolic rate is the amount of energy your body as a whole spends per certain unit of time. Again, usually it's a day. So likely at this point you will ask me, what is the problem, Dr. Sam? The problem, in my opinion, is in the term rate. When we use the term rate, it totally makes sense to talk about faster metabolism and slower metabolism. But most of the people, when they're talking about fast metabolism or slow metabolism, they do not realize that there are at least two dimensions of metabolic rate. And it's actually quite a complex concept that is very difficult for me to explain, but I will do my best. First, I will tell you exactly how I see it. When I hear metabolic rate, I understand, for example, that a certain amount of flesh, like a pound of muscle at rest, has one metabolic rate. But if we start working this muscle, say we're talking about bicep, and we start doing some curls, or just like walking, moving, the metabolic rate of the muscle increases significantly, and it becomes more metabolically active. So it's the same amount of the same tissue that gets to work, its metabolic activity increases, and its metabolic rate increases. Unfortunately, the concept of metabolic rate of a person involves the whole person, the whole body, and it depends on multiple factors other than just the level of activity. It involves or depends on the total body composition, lean body mass, humidity, other environmental factors like temperature. If it is like too high or too low, we have to regulate the body's temperature. It depends on our nutrition, it depends on our age, it depends on our medications, on our hormones. So there are so many things that kind of clamped together into one concept that effectively there are so many ways of boosting our metabolism. Like, for example, we can engage in physical exercise. It will increase our metabolic rate because we need to spend more energy. Or, for example, we've got low thyroid, we can take thyroid hormone supplement or as a medication, and it will increase our metabolic rate exactly in the way I picture metabolic rate. The same tissue, same amount of the same tissue will become more metabolically active. But there are other ways of boosting our metabolic rate, which might not seem to be even obvious. Like, for example, if you consume more food, there is something that's called thermic effect of food. If you consume lots of protein, your body has to burn more calories to extract amino acids from this protein and absorb it. And effectively, by consuming more food, you will increase your metabolic rate. But likely, it will lead to weight gain. Quite frankly, I assume that I'm not explaining it well enough, so I would like to use an analogy. Imagine that you have a truck, or better, like a tanker, that has a huge tank full of gas, and this tank is actually quite unusual. It's not made out of metal, but it's made out of something that is stretchy, like rubber. And as you drive your truck or your body, you use up this gas from the tank. And obviously you can refill it at gas stations. Let's call them Mac Petroleum. So imagine you've got this tanker, and you've got very funny aesthetic preference. You would like this tanker to be slimmer, to have a smaller tank, so you have to somehow lose a lot of gas out of this tank, and you want to have like a fit looking tanker. I know it sounds odd, very weird analogy, but I hope it will serve us well. So you talk to a specialist, a tanker fitness specialist, who tells you that, well, it's kind of obvious. If you want to decrease the size of the tank, you have to use lots of gas. And if you want to lose this gas, so I've got a feeling that I'd be better off using the term fuel. If you use a lot of fuel, as you use it, the tank will shrink and your tanker will look slimmer, right? So how do you use it? Or you just drive around. Just do your regular stuff, your regular trips from A to B to C to D and so on. So totally makes sense. And you know that, for example, you've got 1,000 liters of fuel there and you use 10 liters per day, you will lose all your, again, I almost said gas, fuel in 100 days. Totally makes sense. It's a great way of losing fuel. So you start doing it, but you notice that as the tank shrinks, as the amount of fuel in the tank reduces, your tanker in general becomes lighter. And you notice that instead of spending, say, 10 liters of fuel per day, you started spending 9, just because the tanker is smaller, lighter, and your engine doesn't need as much fuel to propel the tank or the tanker around. At this point, I hope you have a clear understanding of what's happening. Yes, your tanker is smaller, it uses less energy on a daily basis or per trip, per 100 kilometers, whatever, and you understand that, yes, your fuel consumption has reduced or your metabolism slowed down, but it doesn't mean that you're not losing weight anymore. You are still losing weight. It will just take, instead of 100 days, it will take maybe 110, 120, because the tanker itself weighs something, right? And if we take this analogy kind of back to our bodies, exactly the same thing happens when we lose body weight, because we've got all these tissues that we have to maintain. As we lose fat and lean body tissue, usually our metabolic rate slows down, because at least one of the factors is because we have less tissues to maintain. So as you lose weight, your metabolic rate will slow down. And there are some ideas that somehow you can break your metabolism, or for some reason your metabolism will slow down to the point that you won't be able to function, or there will be no way you can create caloric deficit. It is, quite frankly, total nonsense. There is no single research proof of that, and there are no people, unless you got some very severe endocrine disorder, who would be able to not to be in significant caloric deficit and not lose weight. I can argue with anybody at any point. Just let me know. It's not a challenge, but if you feel like challenging me, leave a comment. I'm gonna argue about that. Maybe I'll make another video, maybe with yourself. In any case, let's get back to the tanker, but prior to doing so, I would like to ask you a question. If you are the owner of this tanker and you realize that your fuel consumption is going down, would you be upset? I don't think so. I think you would take it as a natural course of events and just, it is what it is. And in my opinion, you should take exactly the same approach with your body. When you lose weight, your metabolism will slow down a little bit, but it doesn't mean that you're not losing weight anymore. You're on a good track, you shouldn't worry about that. Unfortunately, people take this part quite drastically sometimes. So again, let's get back to the tanker and imagine that on top of all these interesting conceptions around this tanker, you also like the feeling of a full tank. So you drive by Mac Petroleum once, twice, 3 times, and then you realize, I really like the feeling of full tank. So you fill it up a couple of times, it extends, it doesn't look as good as you would like it to look because you like slimmer tankers, but at the same time, or miracle, you realize that as you drive from A to B to C to D, you realize that instead of spending 10 liters of fuel per day, for example, you spend 12 or 13. And again, it totally makes sense because you've got a heavier vehicle right now and your engine needs more gas or fuel to propel it, right? Again, would you call it boosting your fuel expenditure? Is it a good thing? Because a lot of people in the fitness industry will tell you that if you eat more or more frequently, you will boost your metabolism, but essentially you will gain weight, and that is the part that's usually been omitted. And I don't think that anybody who understands this scenario really well would be happy with this kind of boosting their metabolism. So I think at this point I've provided you with like 2 explanations. One of them is just purely theoretical, direct. Another one is in the form of analogy. And I hope that now you understand that this idea of metabolic rate is a little bit flawed or much more complex than we normally think about. And quite frankly, my solution to this metabolic rate conundrum would be not to use the term metabolic rate much. I would say you should use the term metabolic rate only in one context, which is when you balance your caloric intake with total daily energy expenditure or metabolic rate. And quite frankly, you can lose weight or gain weight irrespectively of your metabolic rate, whether it's fast or slow, increased or decreased. You could see that it actually goes in opposite directions sometimes. But the most important thing is this difference between your total daily energy expenditure or metabolic rate and caloric intake. If your caloric intake is less than your metabolic rate, no matter how slow it is, you will be in caloric deficit and you will lose weight and you will lose fat. Most of the weight will be fat. If your caloric intake exceeds your metabolic rate, no matter how fast it is, you will be in caloric excess and your body will store this energy in the form of fat, maybe glycogen, maybe some protein, but in general, you will gain weight. And that is the gist of my today's video. You should not care about metabolic rate at all. Whether it's fast, slow, increasing, decreasing, what really matters, again, is the difference between metabolic rate and the caloric intake. If your caloric intake is less than your metabolic rate, you will be in caloric deficit, you will lose weight, no matter how slow your metabolism is. If you're in caloric surplus, if you're consuming more calories than you spend, no matter how fast your metabolism is, no matter how much you have boosted it, you're in caloric surplus, you will still gain weight, or at least will not lose weight. It is that simple. And if you use my approach, and I hope I was convincing enough and my explanation was sufficient, you will never run into any kind of problem and you will not let yourself be fooled by some people who might use certain slogans, certain concepts, ideas in order to lure you into some sort of schemes and just take your money or waste your time, and effectively to misguide or distract you from your weight loss goal. So, having said that, it's time to wrap up this video. Actually, it's the last video I'm making in this room with this background. Actually, in this room. I'm moving to a new place, and tomorrow, already today, this bookcase will be moved to my new place. So likely I won't be making any videos for the next couple of weeks, at least with this kind of setting. So I actually misspoke. The background likely will remain the same, but it will be in a different environment. I have a lot of work to do there, and I hope that after I'm done, you will return to my channel, and I will be happy to share my new videos with you, and I hope that you like them. So hit the like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell, check out my website, drsamshealth.com. Please interact with me, leave comments, ask questions. I know that sometimes I say things that might not be that obvious or they appear to be controversial, but you're always welcome to argue with me. And if you have been following my channel, you likely have noticed that actually I try to respond to almost all comments, and we engage in some actually very interesting discussions sometimes with people. Anyhow, I'm done for today. I've got a very busy day tomorrow. I've got lots of stuff to move. And once again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. All the best.